So something else that's going to affect a person's experience of adolescence is gender. During adolescence and emerging adulthood, gender issues are especially prominent. In every culture, gender is a key issue, whether it is a traditional culture or a more modern culture. The expectations a culture has for males and females are different from the moment they're born. For example, research indicates that a child becomes aware of their gender by the time they are about 2 years old. Doesn't mean a complete understanding in the manner an adult has, but they become aware. And from a very early age, we are all sensitive to the differences in what is considered appropriate for each gender. What's considered normal if we're male or female, what we should be interested in, what we should like or dislike, even how we speak, what we wear, everything. And particularly when discussing adolescence, again, in both individualistic and collectivistic cultures, typically the cultural expectations related to gender become much more pronounced at puberty, which takes place during adolescence. In other words, in all cultures, gender expectations intensify at puberty. You're always aware of what's expected to you, but at puberty it really intensifies. In most cultures, the roles expected of a person differ significantly depending on if they're male or female. So this includes differences in their behavior during courtship, regarding their sexual behavior, sometimes their education, even how they spend a typical day and who they are or are not allowed to socialize with. All countries and cultures have different expectations, but the degree of difference varies. In the West, as you are aware, a lot of the differences we have are not very distinct, and clothing is a good example of this. Both males and females like to wear a lot of the same clothes. T-shirts, jeans, sweatshirts. The cut might be slightly different. Typical designs and colors might be slightly different, but they're essentially the same garment. In the West, both males and females have the same general opportunity to be educated, to participate in the same kinds of activities. And because this is the norm for us, looking at how deeply gender differences impact other countries can be surprising. For example, in Morocco, males are generally expected to be at least somewhat sexually experienced when they get married, but females are expected to have no sexual experience at all, to be virgins. So because of this, it's not uncommon for a boy's first sexual experience to be with a prostitute. In addition, in really traditional families, the morning after being married, the new couple are expected to hang the sheet from their bed from a window, complete with the bloody stain on it to prove the girl's hymen was broken on the wedding night, confirming that she was indeed a virgin. In the West, we clearly do not do that. We no longer have such an ideal that a woman must be a virgin when she marries, or at least many of us don't. But we do have specific gender expectations. Most nurses are still usually female. Most secretaries are still usually female. There are very few stay-at-home fathers compared to the number of stay-at-home mothers. Women are underrepresented as truck drivers. We still have differences in gender expectations, even if they tend to be much more subtle. Now, I also want to mention globalization because it has a direct and immediate impact on culture. Yes, cultures are distinct, but what globalization has done is decrease that distinctness. It has decreased boundaries between cultures. The boundaries have lessened. So they're not as distinctly unique as they once were because of increased contact. And with that increased contact comes increased influence. So increasingly what's happening is we're seeing a global culture develop. If you go to the most remote traditional community in northern Canada off the mainland, in the Arctic, you will find phones and TV and the internet. When I lived in Nunavut, it was so surreal because I first moved there. I was unpacking my things, watching Judge Judy, looking out the window to see a sled team going by, and it was such a juxtaposition of cultures. There are very, very, very few parts of the world that have not been affected by technology, and because of this, by globalization. Everyone is able to be in contact with everyone else and to do so regularly, which means everybody is having an influence on everyone else, whether they intend to or not. And because of this, globalization has occurred. Increasing worldwide technology and economic integration have made different parts of the world increasingly connected and increasingly similar culturally speaking. Another way of saying this is that the world, in a way, is becoming smaller because people are becoming more similar. We travel more. We communicate more in various ways. We have economies that are increasingly connected to each other's. We are more aware of each other. Music, movies, TV, clothes, food. And adolescents seem to be particularly attracted to being connected to a global culture. In fact, they tend to make a specific effort to be more connected to a global culture, and they do this online and with cell phones. But because of this, whether you view it negatively or positively, to phrase this in a more academic manner, young people are less committed to pre-established roles in their own culture and to a pre-established way of life than previous generations. Young people are doing things differently because they have contact with other people on a regular basis. Now, this doesn't mean young people are all growing up exactly the same, but it does mean they are increasingly bicultural. Their identity increasingly includes aspects of two different cultures, their local culture and the global culture. So again, while in westernized modern countries, our experience of adolescence and emerging adulthood is very distinct compared to other countries, for example, Africa, within our country, there's still a great deal of variation. There are extreme differences in some cases, and all of this is affected by technology and globalization. So again, there is a cultural context to adolescence, to this stage of life, to the expectations people have of you when you're in it, to what you expect of the people around you, to how they view you, how you view yourself, what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, and it's determined in part by where you live in the culture you exist in. But again, even in the exact same place, there's going to be variation. So if you look at Western societies, getting up 2 hours before school starts to look after younger siblings because your parents are at work, and you're responsible to get them dressed and get them to school on time, in addition to being wholly responsible to yourself. Compared to you, your mom or dad waking you up at 8 when school starts at 9, they watch the clock and keep you on time so you don't have to do that yourself. And then they drive you to school with a lunch prepared for you. Very, very different experiences. An adolescent working 2 to 3 nights a week for 4 hours, plus at least one full shift on the weekend, 9 to 5. Because when you get paid, 85% of every single paycheck goes into a savings account for your education. Compared to an adolescent being able to spend their money on whatever they want because your parents are going to pay for your education. Compared to not having to work throughout high school at all. So even within one culture, one country, one city, one town, adolescent experience can be very dissimilar. Now, to just summarize all this is your first lecture for the course, and its intent is to provide a general introduction to the subject. I started by taking a historical look at what being an adolescent meant, how it was perceived, and what would be expected from somebody in that stage of life. Moved on to the age of adolescence, G. Stanley Hall. Brought in this shift to emerging adulthood and the characteristics that tend to exist during that stage. Instability, being self-focused, feeling in between, and the feeling that there's infinite possibilities and optimism. Then I brought culture into the discussion and talked about the difference between individualistic and collectivistic cultures. And I included some specific examples like Africa, North Africa and the Middle East, India, Latin America, Asia. And I kind of rounded things off with the effect of culture regarding gender and globalization. So this is your first class for the course. I would recommend, yes, read the textbook as well as listen to the lecture before you do your quizzes online. Please remember you can only attempt a quiz once. If you have problems with a quiz and it shuts down on you halfway through or won't load or something, send me an email and that I can go in and see that it happened and reset it for you. However, if you run out of time, it's just going to shut down and record what your mark is. So this is your first class. Don't forget to do your quiz, and I hope you've enjoyed it.